Jpmorgan, Citigroup and Wells Fargo have all reported earnings on this Friday that show that while the earnings per share, the EPS level on the quarter has beaten expectations in all cases, Jpmorgan's trading income, fixed income, currencies and commodities was lower than forecast, but Citigroup beat on this metric. Wells Fargo, meanwhile, which is the biggest retail bank in the States and doesn't have such a big trading business, has beaten on the EPS number by a slim margin, but credit losses were far less than had been forecast, which is a positive for the stock. The banks have been the big beneficiaries of the so-called Trump trade on the promise of changes in legislation that were expected to have benefited the banking sector generally. If that legislation fails to materialise, that is bound to be a negative for share prices across the sector. On the positive side is the Fed's policy of raising interest rates. Banks are interest rate sensitive and earn more when rates are high. So the faster the Fed raises rates, the better for the sector. And as you can see over my shoulder here, that on the IG platform, generally speaking, the banks do have an upward bias in terms of the positioning of IG clients at the moment. And you can see that Citigroup and Wells Fargo are very close to being totally long. Jpmorgan a little less so. Let's take a look at the charts. I want to go first of all with Jpmorgan Chase. This stock is down 1.5% with about an hour or so to go before Wall Street gets underway. This is an all-session stock, which means it trades outside of hours. That's the daily chart. A quick look at what we got in terms of the hourly chart, and you can see the negative swing that's been seen. That being said, generally speaking, this is holding on to the gains, and we have expectations that the recent record highs indeed could be beaten in the next few days if indeed we see a continuation of the earnings beat and the environment improve for these banks. So trading at the moment at 91.97.5, easing back into recent gains that we've seen for Jpmorgan Chase. I want to take a look, if we can, at what's happening for Citigroup. The Citigroup share price, like Jpmorgan, has seen recent highs. These are not overall long-term record highs because these were far higher than this before the financial crisis back in 2009. But at $68.89, we got recent highs for Citigroup like we have at Jpmorgan. And again, like Jpmorgan, a little bit of an easing back in the share price, just by 1/3 of 1%. But expectations are that so long as the Fed continues to raise interest rates, this is a bigger mover for the overall sentiment for the sector. So looking again at this sector to improve potentially over the summer. Anything like an easing back below probably this point here would be the first point at which questions would be asked as to whether or not the upward trend can be sustained. But I think generally speaking, Citigroup, if it trades anything less than about 55.58, you can expect an opportunity to buy into the pullbacks in some of these. But anything below the 55.58, then I think big questions are going to be asked as to the long-term move up on some of these banking stocks. Just a quick look at what's happening as Wells Fargo. As I said, it's a little bit of a different bank in terms of the fact it's a retail bank rather than the bank that benefits enormously from its trading business and IPOs and so forth. Wells Fargo has had a little bit more of a rough time recently the highs that we saw back in March. The November lows, it's benefiting still above the November lows that we saw on the days before the Trump win. But since Trump has come to power and promised this legislation change, despite the fact it may not now happen because of other issues that are behind the Trump presidency, Wells Fargo is down 1.25% after these numbers out today. But like all the other banks, it could benefit if there is a rise on the interest rate background to the banking sector, which will help. Where we are at the moment at 54.89, this is a downward trend. If we get a close above this line here, that's bound obviously to be positive for the stock of Wells Fargo. And like Citigroup before it, if you get anything below about 51.23, I think you then have to start asking questions as to whether or not we're going to see pretty much all of this Trump trade unwound. But at the moment, at least, it is holding up at 54.93. Now, next week, there are numbers for Morgan Stanley, Bank of America and Goldman Sachs, amongst others in the financial sector. Those are also all sessions traded on the IG platform. So it means that it starts at 9 a.m. in the morning UK time, and you can trade those through the point at which they produce those earnings before the bell. Those come out throughout the week next week.